Welcome to the Athletic Fantasy Cheat Sheet presented by Jock Market, where daily fantasy sports becomes a stock exchange. You can download the Jock Market app in the App Store today. Android coming soon. I'm Derek Van Riper here along with Jake Seeley and Brandon Funston, getting you ready for Week 5 of this fantasy football season. Later on in today's show, we'll be joined by Michael Beller. Ed Mallion's back with another installment of Brit's Picks, and the Athletic's Jeff Zrebiec will join us in just a few minutes to talk about the Ravens-Bengals matchup. As always, we're taking your questions as well. Send those our way wherever you're watching our show on this fine Sunday morning. Gentlemen, it's becoming a little bit of a pattern, and one that I don't really like. The Broncos-Patriots game has been moved to Week 6, so we have those two teams now getting bumped off of Week 5. Lions and Packers were on an actual bye this week. And to make matters worse, we're not sure that the Bills-Titans game, which has been moved to Tuesday, is going to happen either. So we talked about what you can do as a commissioner to deal with this situation last week. Hopefully you put those plans in place. But Bills-Titans, what's your gut feel on this? Is it an easy call to just go ahead and sit anybody you have going in that game, Jake?
I don't think it's easy. It's funny. I keep checking I'm getting text messages from league mates and stuff like that are seeing reports on Twitter. I feel like we're Schefter right now. What's going on with my cell phone? The truth is, I would say there's two here. We were talking about before, actually three if you include Jono. I would say Derrick Henry, AJ Brown, and Jono Smith. It's tough for me to bench them. I think I might just risk it because the worst case scenario, we find out Tuesday the game is happening. And those are huge. Those are huge names. Stephon Diggs too. So those four right there. If you're benching them, unless you have, maybe you have Jamison Crowder, and I know it's risky with Joe Flacco, but I think he'll be fine with that. But it would have to be somebody just a tier below. I want to be benching Derrick Henry for Devonta Freeman, but I would bench him maybe if I'm deep and I have Antonio Gibson, maybe something like that. And I think that's what we really have to look at.
You forgot Josh Allen there, Jake. Don't forget about him.
That's kind of a given. I mean, sorry, Josh Allen too. But yeah, go ahead and bench Ryan Tannehill. That's one I would just. He's replaceable.
Well, you didn't even mention the Jake rule, which is to give your league mates the opportunity to send in an emergency player.
Well, DVR said you should have listened to us last week. Yeah. You said you should have listened to Jake's rule last week.
You can't assume everybody's just got the encyclopedia recall on that, but. It's messed up. I'm not nearly as calm on the outside, or on the inside as I am on the outside right now. I've had to send a bunch of emails this morning to my leagues and trying to just get a grasp on things and make sure all my lineups are in my rankings and all my little ancillary little lineups are in place. It's kind of a mess right now.
Yeah, get those notes into the commissioner. Be kind to your commissioner. This is not a fun time to run a fantasy football league with all the changes that are happening. Guys, we're going to talk about a few last-minute replacements in just a few minutes. But first, let's talk to Jeff Zrebiec. He is the Ravens beat writer here at The Athletic. A lot to talk about with that Baltimore team this week. A lot of key players dinged up. Looks like a lot of those guys are going to go. So let's bring Jeff on to the show. Jeff, good morning. Thanks for spending some time with us.
My pleasure, guys. Hope you're doing well.
Doing really well, all things considered. Let's talk about a few of the Ravens that popped up on the injury report this week. Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, Marquise Brown, all officially questionable for today's game against the Bengals. Do you expect all three to be active and ready to go when the official word comes down in about 25 minutes?
Yeah, I do. The only guy for the Ravens that I expect not to be able to play is their starting right guard Tyree Phillips, but that's not relevant for fantasy purposes. Watching Lamar Jackson at practice Friday, you wouldn't have known he was dealing with anything. He was moving around well. He didn't have any knee brace on. He looked in a happy and good spirits. Said he's 100%. Harbaugh said he's 100%. I don't expect that to have an impact today. Marquise Brown either. Mark Andrews is a guy I'd always watch a little carefully because he gets so banged up, and the Ravens depend on him, very heavily. But I watched him too in Friday's practice, and he looked fine. So they should be pretty much all hands on deck today.
The backfield has been a three-headed monster this season with Mark Ingram, J.K. Dobbins, and Gus Edwards. Is there any reason to believe that things will change in that game plan in the near future if all three of these backs stay healthy?
Probably not, because I think that's the way Roman prefers it, and they want to keep these guys fresh for December and hopefully beyond in their case. But, it's interesting. Around here, they're calling for more Gus Edwards, and that surprises me at this stage of the game. I think most people figured that eventually it would be J.K. Dobbins pushing Mark Ingram for the starting job, but Gus Edwards clearly has been their most effective running back so far. However, he doesn't really pick up blitzes, and he's not really a factor in the passing game. So Mark Ingram still does some things that Gus Edwards really doesn't. It's been frustrating for a lot of people I know, and I think I'm even wondering from a pure football standpoint, are they preventing all of them from getting into a rhythm? It's just their running game's been good if you look at the numbers, but it's not really been great, and part of that is missing Yanda and the offensive line. But it just seems to me they've had kind of a quick hook with the hot hand. If a guy makes a couple big carries, it seems like he's going to the sidelines. So I think at some point the carries will become a little more predictable, and they may lean more heavily on just two guys rather than trying to get three involved. But I don't think they're there yet. This early in the season, I think they want to keep everyone involved and probably try to establish everybody, for the second half of the season.
It's the best real-life approach if you're not keeping players from maximizing their efficiency, but it's absolutely a fantasy nightmare for us to deal with on a weekly basis. Let's look at the pass catchers for a moment. Beyond Hollywood Brown and Mark Andrews, we've been waiting for a steady third option to emerge. Is Miles Boykin ever going to break out, or could it be Devin Duvernay or someone else who emerges to be that third option in the passing game?
Yeah, we're not lying when we say this. For the second straight summer, Miles Boykin was probably one of their most productive receivers and players on the field. He made a ton of plays, often while being guarded by, a few of their top corners. He just looked great. He was playing with a lot of energy. He looked fast, but it seems like when the games start, I'm not saying he freezes up a little. He's just not the same guy. It seems like he's had trouble carrying it over to the game on Sunday, and he doesn't play as fast, and he's thinking too much. We saw some flashes a little bit early, nothing, again, fantasy relevant as of yet. And then the last 2 games, he's been much more quiet. And we also saw an instance where he didn't get out of his break against Washington, and it cost Lamar Jackson an interception. So that kind of thing, can jeopardize the quarterback's confidence in you. They still like Boykin. They still think he'll be a factor. But I'd expect more and more for them to try to get Devin Duvernay involved. They love his speed. He's been great on kickoff returns. He played a career high in snaps last week. I think that will continue. I think they really like what they have there. And as more and more comfortable he gets in the offense, I think they'll rely on him more and more.
Thinking about how the Ravens defense will try to match up with those Bengals receivers, who will Marlon Humphrey focus on the most in that group of pass catchers?
Just because Boyd does so much from the slot, I think Marlon Humphrey will be on Boyd a lot of the times. Since Tavon Young had the season-ending knee injury in week 2, we've seen Marlon Humphrey move to the slot and play a lot out of the slot, and they've been relying on, obviously, Marcus Peters on one side and either Jimmy Smith or Anthony Averett on the other. I think they're comfortable with that. Smith often takes the tight end, and then Averett's on the other receiver, and then you have Marlon Humphrey matching up inside. Boyd has killed the Ravens in recent years. Obviously cost them the playoffs that one year. So they'll pay a lot of attention to him, and I'd expect Marlon Humphrey to spend a good part of the day on him.
One last question for you, Jeff. Ravens favored by 12 in this game. Do you think the Bengals keep it closer than that?
I do. I do think they keep it closer to that. And I mean, look, it's supposed to rain all day, so that's a factor. And then the fact is the Bengals always play the Ravens tough. They've long always taken them down to the wire and played in very close games. Bengals have obviously had one-score games every week so far. I think this game's going to be a lot closer than we think. I don't think the Ravens are clicking yet, and I think the Bengals are getting more confidence by the week. Now, I do think the Ravens, because they'll be able to run the ball and because I think the Bengals offensive line is still a little bit suspect, I think the Ravens win this game in the end. But I would be a little surprised if this is a rout.
All right, there you have it. Jeff, we really appreciate the time again this morning. Enjoy the game today.
Thanks for having me, guys. Have a great day.
All right, you too. That's Jeff Zrebiec joining us from M&T Bank Stadium this morning. Covers the Ravens for The Athletic. You can get all of Jeff's written coverage along with all of our fantasy football content, including Jake's rankings, for just $1 a month at theathletic.com/Jake. cheat sheet. Let's bring back Jake and Brandon and talk about some of the most added players on the board this week. We saw D'Ernest Johnson get scooped up in over 80% of CBS leagues. And Jake, the first thought I had was that role last week might have been an outlier for two reasons. It was a weird game against Dallas, and Kareem Hunt was less than 100% with that groin injury. So do you expect Hunt to share as much of the workload with D'Ernest Johnson going forward as he did in week 4?
So I'm assuming Nando put this question in here, not you. This is like I don't think D'Ernest Johnson is going to be a factor unless it's games like last week where they are up, they are able to run out the clock or run in control. And so there'll be a few games like that, but we're talking about the Browns. I mean, how many games do we really expect them to have that similar situation? This is Kareem Hunt's backfield. Kareem Hunt is a top 10 running back, period, no matter whose team he's on. And being a backup to Nick Chubb, the reason we've seen this so far is because he is legitimately an elite running back as a backup, which is just absurd. It's good for the Browns for signing him there for another 2 years and getting that done. But it's the Kareem Hunt show now. Johnson, it would be a desperation play for me.
We got a question here from Chris, which is right in the wheelhouse
Jackson.
we're talking about. Easily a Jackson for Jake. I mean, do you agree, Brandon? Is Justin Jackson just in a much better situation in that Chargers backfield with the share of the workload he'll have along with Joshua Kelly?
Yeah, and this was kind of, who is it going to be between Joshua Kelly and Justin Jackson to complement Austin Eckler? And Jake said this a lot, and I think a lot of people agreed and said it as well, that Josh Kelly was different than Austin Eckler and Justin Jackson. Justin Jackson more aligned with the Austin Eckler role, and so it made sense that Josh Kelly kind of ascended into the platoon situation with Eckler. With Eckler out, now it's easy to see Justin Jackson plugging into that role with Joshua Kelly now kind of being that lead guy. And Daniel Popper, who covers the Chargers for The Athletic, answered this question this week. How's that split going to be? And he guessed it was probably somewhere around 65-35 in favor of Josh Kelly. I think it's actually going to be more about 60-40. But if you look at the 34 touches that the Chargers get in the backfield per game, that's about 20 to 22 for Josh Kelly. Makes about, seems about right. And then Justin Jackson about 12 to 14. I think you can count on that. I feel good about that. Whereas D'Ernest Johnson, I'm not sure that I can just make that leap that he's into the mid-teens in touches automatically right now. I think it's maybe something a little bit less than that.
Yeah, I think I share your guys' skepticism with D'Ernest Johnson as well. Darcy's got a question. We'll throw this one to Brandon. Odell Beckham or Deontay Johnson, and David Johnson or Miles Sanders in a PPR league this week. And it's including a please, which I always appreciate.
Yeah, I know Miles Sanders is a tough matchup against Pittsburgh. I'm still going that way. He's a guy that can hurt you both on the ground and through the air. It's going to be tough, but I think he gets it done, when you add the receiving production today, which I think he'll get a decent amount of it. David Johnson looks old. We might see a little bit more Duke Johnson with Bill O'Brien gone, so I'm leaning Miles Sanders there. And it was Deontay Johnson and Odell Beckham. I'm going to go Odell Beckham. Deontay Johnson coming back from the injury, probably gets shadow coverage from Darius Slay. You'd say, why would Slay shadow Deontay Johnson over Juju? Slay usually stays away from the slot. Juju runs a lot in the slot, so it makes more sense that he'd be on Deontay Johnson.
All right, let's get to another question here from Felix. Chenault, Boyd, Juju, Ayuk for wide receiver 2 and a flex. Question comes from Felix. Cheers from Germany. What do you think here, Jake?
Just Boyd and Juju, the two best wide receivers, and it's not even close to the other two. This isn't even a close question, in my opinion.
I'm really interested in Chenault, though, from like a GPP perspective today. I think that Jags-Texans game is one that has a chance to be a little bit high scoring, so there could be a little extra value with some of those depth receivers in that game. Brandon, you mentioned it, no Bill O'Brien in Houston anymore. Does this really change a lot about the Texans offense? I mean, I think part of the narrative coming into the season was that Bill O'Brien overpaid to get David Johnson, therefore David Johnson would be heavily featured, and he gets, most of the touches in that backfield, but he's not getting the kind of workload that we expected back on draft day. So are you making any adjustments to your expectations for this Texans offense?
Well, Texans want to play for the postseason this year. They have to decide that they need Deshaun Watson to be full Deshaun Watson, which is I would just turn him loose. He's not running a whole lot right now, and that's part of his game. They need that. They need him throwing the ball downfield, and I think they need to bring in Duke Johnson and play him a little bit more. Maybe the younger, fresher legs, a different look. But David Johnson right now, is not, giving him all the touches in that backfield doesn't seem like the best answer for this offense at the moment. So I don't think there's going to be a ton of adjustment other than, maybe a little bit more Duke Johnson. And if it was me, I would be like, okay, we're something Sean Watson, we got the pass. How can we get him going? I think he needs to run more. I would just let him take more shots.
Still a Houston offense that I think clearly misses DeAndre Hopkins in a lot of key situations as well. One of the key injuries we're tracking today is Julio Jones. He's going to be a game-time decision with that hamstring injury, Jake. Maybe we'll get some clarity here in about 15 minutes as inactives begin to trickle in. I think one player people are really curious about is Olamide Zaccheaus. He's viable, I think, pretty much everywhere if Julio plays or doesn't play, right?
Yeah, I would say so, but I mean, he's viable in what sense? I have Zaccheaus. Where did I finish with him? I think somewhere around the 50s. Yeah, around the Keelan Cole, Randall Cobb, Mecole Hardman, Brandon Cooks range. Like that's kind of where he deserves to be. He's probably got a safer floor than a lot of guys in that range, but I don't know if he has the ceiling. I think a lot of people are just going to automatically plug him in because you see Carolina. But you got to remember, we're talking about the Carolina defense, and we assume their offense is going to keep this pace and score against the Falcons. But we've seen before, like the Vikings from last week or the week before, or whatever it was, where, it's not necessarily going to happen. And the Falcons could just run the ball with Todd Gurley and Brian Hill, and just it might not be that many targets that we're expecting, or it might be a Hayden Hurst week. So, I wouldn't immediately just say he's a must play, but he's definitely on the radar.
Yeah, it just seems like most weeks that offense sustains plenty of depth pass catchers, and Julio not.
I think everybody's already forgotten about Russell Gage. Everybody's just like, he doesn't matter anymore.
Zaccheaus is the new toy, I guess.
Zaccheaus, get it right, like the Bible. Come on.
Oh, come on. Conman752 wants to know, who should I start at wide receiver, Crowder, Tate, Julio, or Traquan Smith? And should I have Jonnu Smith at flex?
Can't start Julio.
No, you can't plan.
No.
I mean, we'll get an official word, but it just doesn't look like he's going to go.
No.
Yeah, and even if he does, how's that treated you the last couple of weeks? I think. Look, I think you got to go Jamison Crowder. I love the way he's looked with Sam Darnold. We'll see if that is the case with Joe Flacco, but I like him the best of that group. Golden Tate is not a bad fallback, and as far as the Jonnu thing goes, that's if your commissioner doesn't give you an option for an emergency player, that's just you're gonna have to maybe wait this one out a couple more hours, see if there's like a Monday night option. Who's playing Monday night? New Orleans and the Chargers. Yeah, I don't know. Look for a late game that maybe you can have a backup tight end that you can get as much information before you have to make that decision as possible. I'm leaning that the game's going to play. So if you're in a tight situation, maybe you just risk it. But obviously, who knows at this point.
Jake, you mentioned Russell Gage before. Fernando wants to know Gage or Brandon Ayuk in a PPR league.
I'm going with Russell Gage. I think people are just assuming Debo's not going to be a factor or thing. Like he said, he had like a little stomach bug. It wasn't COVID. He's come back fine, tested fine, says he feels fine. I think Debo was already involved a lot in his first game back. I would say it's his now. I still like Ayuk, but if you're giving me Ayuk versus Russell Gage, I'm going to take the offense where I have the number 2 potential option versus the number 3.
All right, a lot of questions rolling in. We'll get to a few more as we move through.
Loose DVR. Frozen.
Skinny production.
There we go.
Overall, hey, he's back. Skinny tree in the Jets offense right now. Le'Veon Bell's back. Crowder's a target hog. Joe Flacco is at quarterback, though. Does that considerably lower your expectations for the offense as a whole, or is it comparable to what we saw with Sam Darnold to this point in the season? What do you think, Brandon?
How can we lower our expectations for this Jets offense anymore? That's a hard one to get around. I think it's Flacco. What do we know about him? He's a short, intermediate range guy at this point in his career. If Le'Veon Bell is indeed back and getting his full, allotment, then you feel good about him getting dump off passes in the passing game. That's why I'm kind of like I'm still on Crowder, even though Darnold's out. Maybe unlocks Chris Herndon. I wouldn't trust that. Believe me, I've tried in 2 tight end or tight end scoring bonus scoring leagues. Tried Chris Herndon, trying to hope that he gets going. It makes sense that he should be a part of this offense with all these injuries and stuff. It's just not happening for him. So right now, I think you're trusting Jamison Crowder and Le'Veon Bell, and you're moving on with everybody else.
Got a question from the Twilight Assassin, Le'Veon Bell or Josh Kelly in a PPR league. What do you think, Brandon?
I honestly, I'm going to go Kelly here. I said trust Le'Veon Bell, but it's more like, to a point at this point. Is kind of like, high end RB3 at this point. But yeah, I think Josh Kelly is you could argue a top 20 fantasy running back play this week with Eckler out.
Must say a lot about Le'Veon Bell. My home league is only a 10-team league, and he was available on the waiver wire this weekend. And I didn't immediately add him. I kind of hesitated before adding him. I think the volume's good enough where he should be rostered, but it was hard to cut a player to add him. I was like, I don't really know if I see much ceiling there. And anyway, it's just weird to see Le'Veon Bell on waiver wires, but maybe he belongs there in smaller leagues. Cam Akers fully practiced on Friday. The Rams' backfield's been a trouble spot all season, Jake. The roles changed hands a couple of times. Is it going to be Cam Akers this week? Is he ultimately the answer, or do we have to wait longer for Akers to potentially take over this backfield?
As Jordan Rodriguez tweeted out and said, I don't know who to tell you to start in fantasy. It's the same thing. She covers the team. It's something we talked about last week. It's something brought up on the podcast when I was talking about the former running back saying, sometimes coaches see something and get stuck with it during the week. Like comparing the Colts to this situation as well. It looks like they want Akers to be the guy, and that's why they keep mixing between Brown and Henderson and never really giving the full go-ahead even after Henderson's game. This situation this week, between those two specifically, when you're talking about pass rush, Malcolm Brown, better pass blocker. So this would lean towards Malcolm Brown, but now you have Cam Akers back in the mix. I don't know how he is for their eyes when it comes to his pass blocking. He's a decent pass blocking running back, but not quite to the Brown level. So I think we could get a full-blown committee this week with Akers having the highest upside potential, in my opinion. But at the same time, I don't trust this backfield. If I can avoid all of them, I would.
Yeah, I think from a season-long perspective, it's an easy avoid. I think from a DFS perspective in a big tournament, maybe I would throw a dart at Akers and just hope that he takes over the backfield sooner than expected, but that's kind of a Hail Mary sort of play at this point.
Or Henderson, if you get past the defensive line, then you're golden.
That could work too. Terry McLaurin was not on the final injury report this week. Some good news there. He was dealing with a thigh injury earlier in the week. We found out Dontrell Inman's good to go, but it's going to be Kyle Allen instead of Dwayne Haskins at quarterback this week. Brandon, do you still trust Terry McLaurin at the same level? Has he proven that he's just quarterback proof at this point?
Yeah, he proved it last year, right? As a rookie with Case Keenum and Colt McCoy and Dwayne Haskins, 3 different quarterbacks. It didn't really seem to matter. And what we know about Kyle Allen, he's got some gunslinger to him. Wasn't afraid to take risk last year for Ron Rivera in Carolina. So yeah, I think this might work out just fine for Terry McLaurin. You could certainly make a case that it might be working out better for him if Kyle Allen comes in and does the things he was doing last year with the Panthers and just turning it loose. So I'm not really worried about Terry McLaurin. In a way, I'm kind of cautiously optimistic that it could be a little bit of a bump for him here.
The horrible stack of the week for me is a Washington stack for big field tournaments because you can get anything else you want, and if it works, it's going to be great because you're going to have a bunch of 1% rostered players. Disco Hippos, kind of like Hungry Hippos, I guess, has a question for Jake. Jake, could you please explain Chark's ranking at 15 this week? Didn't look great the first couple of weeks with low targets. Now draws a matchup with Roby when the Texans' D is bad at run defense. What are your thoughts?
Thoughts are, then why did you effing draft him? Like I said, all the time, all these players, then why did you effing draft him? He has a touchdown to offset his bad, quote unquote, week 1, 4 for 4 for 84 in his game back. 2 touchdowns last week and almost 100 yards. If you're going to bench DJ Chark, then why'd you effing draft him?
I feel like I'm unknowingly a puppet in trolling Jake every week, both with the rundown and with questions that are presented on the screen. CFC fan wants to know in a full PPR league, Joshua Kelly, Jerick McKinnon, Jamison Crowder, choose 2 out of 3. What do you think, Brandon?
Man, you know what? I think I'm going to go with the running backs for the safety of play. I just really like Jerick McKinnon this week. Yes, Raheem Mostert could be back, but I don't expect that Mostert's going to get a full complement workload. So I wouldn't be surprised if McKinnon gets at least 12 to 14 touches this week. I love the matchup. So I'm going there, and I'm going to go follow volume with Joshua Kelly. with Austin Eckler out, who was getting around 20 touches per game. Kelly's going to absorb some of that. Could be some of the passing game workload as well. He's done pretty well in the passing game when they've thrown to him. So there could be some PPR helium there. I like Jamison Crowder, but there is a change at quarterback. Who knows? That could have an effect. Timing, things could be off in that regard. And maybe Jamison Crowder doesn't blow up like we've seen the last couple times out.
Got a question here from Sean. Should I flex Robert Woods or Deebo Samuel in
Woods.
a full PPR league? Yeah, I think it's safer by a lot right now, right? I mean, I think the follow-up question, though, with Deebo is, he's supposed to play today. He played about a third of the snaps, I think it was, last week. How much more are they going to scale up his role this week? The matchup is really good. Not good enough to put him ahead of someone like Robert Woods, but what's your expectation workload-wise for Deebo this week, Jake?
I have him inside where I put him inside my top 30 almost. Yeah, I'm right there at Darius Slayton, Deontay Johnson, Russell Gage level. I don't understand. As you just mentioned, this first game back is similar to Devontae Freeman with the Giants. Was quote unquote Devontae Freeman quote out of shape. They give him touches, then he gets 54% last week. Just takes one game for these guys to ramp up. And again, the concern was that he had like a flu-like symptoms, and he was worried that he might have COVID, and he doesn't. I don't know how that you just don't roll out Deebo. I'm not going to say 100%, but if you gave me 80% of Deebo, he's almost a must start for me.
Jimmy Garoppolo back this week for San Francisco as well. So maybe they'll open things up a little bit more through the air. Here's a question I think is kind of in that range. Deebo versus T. Higgins for this week. I mean, where do you go on that one, Jake?
I actually have Deebo at 32 and T. Higgins at 35, so you can go with who you want in that one. I actually think that I'll give a good example here. A lot of people always ask floor versus ceiling. I actually think in this situation, despite the fact of what we're talking about concerns-wise for Deebo, I think he has the better floor because he's not facing the Ravens. T. Higgins could go ballistic if Joe Burrow continues to throw 40, 50 times a game, and he could overcome this matchup just in garbage time alone. But it's also the Ravens defense, and if they just obliterate Joe Burrow, make him look like a rookie, and all of a sudden Joe Burrow comes out of this game with 210 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 interceptions, then T. Higgins has like a one floor.
I was laughing, Jake, because when you said your rankings, I had to go look at mine. I have Deebo 32 and T. Higgins 36. So, I was like, I knew that sounded about right for me too. So I had to go check that out.
CFC fan wants to know, should I start Teddy Bridgewater and Michael Gallup or wait and hope for Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs on Tuesday in a full PPR league? Those are pretty good replacements. Gallup, though, is not getting the targets we expected, right? That's the problem for me in that one is Gallup versus Diggs.
He's been the one most left out. He's the one that's fifth in targets, fifth behind the running back being Zeke and the tight end. He's been left out all except for one game. So in this case, I don't know about you, Brandon. I would actually go Teddy Diggs and do one of each.
Ooh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, but you're just willing to take you're going to risk trying to get the upside, chase the upside of Diggs.
Yes.
Risk getting a 0 over.
Because you're going to risk getting a 0 from Gallup anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of have a feeling this could be a Gallup week to make a big play or two. He gets less targets, but he also gets, nice average depth of targets. He's a vertical stretch guy. If they hit once or twice a game, it's huge for him. And man, against the Giants, I could see that happening. So I'm just going to say this game, it's a mess if this game doesn't happen. So I just really think the NFL is going to try every which way they can to make this game happen.
So you're going Allen Diggs?
I'm going to go Allen Diggs. I'm going to double up.
Wow.
After all that.
High risk, but could be a nice payoff if it happens as expected. Brett wants to know, just lost the New England defense and special teams. The wire's pretty bare. Start Washington or Dallas? And does look like Chase Young could go, which does change that front seven quite a bit. So what do you do there with the Cowboys at home against the Giants and with Washington hosting the Rams? Which defense do you prefer, Jake?
Oh, the footballs. I love the footballs for fantasy purpose, and everybody's attacking the Giants, being like, "Oh, Dallas Cowboys defense is god awful miserable," and everybody's like, "Oh, well, he's facing the Giants, so everything's going to change." And yet they're making the same argument for the Giants offense, saying, "Well, the Dallas Cowboys defense is miserable, so Daniel Jones is going to finally be good. The offense is you can't have it both ways. One's got to have break the other way." So. I'm on the fact where I just don't expect a lot out of the Giants offense, but I expect enough that the Cowboys aren't like a must-start defense. So I'm going with the footballs.
Yeah, I do like that defense a lot when they're healthy up front. They can get pressure right away, so that's definitely a mark in their favor. And look at the projected ownership and roster rates on the Giants offense in DFS this week. That tells you everything you need to know about the current state of the Cowboys.
I really hope it blows up in their faces too. I hope the Giants come out and score like 8 points.
I like how you are now rooting against your favorite team. You've completely you went kind of from like an agnostic spot, it seemed like a couple of years ago, to actively rooting against them.
Oh, I want Gettleman gone. This is so bad.
I know. All right. Our friends at Manscaped don't want you to gamble on shaving the same way that you enjoy gambling on football. Manscaped is the only men's brand dedicated to below-the-waist grooming. Their personal trimmer, the Lawnmower 3.0, is the best hygiene tool for the modern man. Thanks to the Lawnmower ceramic blade and skin-safe technology, your nicks and snags will be reduced. The Lawnmower 3.0 is also waterproof, and it has an LED light on it. For a limited time, subscribers get not 1, but 2 free gifts, including a travel bag and the patented high-performance Manscaped boxer briefs. Get 20% off and free shipping when you go to manscaped.com and use code FANTASY20 at checkout. Get 20% off and free shipping when you go to manscaped.com and use code FANTASY20 at checkout. That's 20% off with free shipping when you go to manscaped.com and use FANTASY20 at checkout. It's time to boost your hygiene with Manscaped. Couple more news items to get to real quick. Michael Thomas and Jared Cook look like they're on the brink of playing. This is the estimation from the Athletics' Cat Terrell. Marshawn Lattimore should be back Monday as well. Full trust level that you're going to have both of those guys available? I mean, Brandon, I'll ask you about Cook in a second, but Michael Thomas, do you guys both agree it's okay to roll him out there this week?
Yeah, full trust level seems like a little bit strong of a statement, but mostly full trust level maybe. As long as he's out there, I don't think it's going to be any problem for Drew Brees to remember who Michael Thomas is.
No. If Michael Thomas is playing, then Michael Thomas is playing on my fantasy team. By the way, I thought we were going to hold it. I forgot my Manscaped, but I was going to be like, I don't know if you can see. Look, I did my armpit. There you go with with Manscaped for everybody out there. I don't know if you can see that. The other part too here is breaking news. Julio Jones is officially inactive, so you have that.
All right, there you have it. No Julio Jones today for
and a fresh shaved armpit.
And a very clean Jake armpit. Thank you, Manscaped, for making sure Jake's armpits aren't completely out of control. Couple quick questions for you guys about under-rostered replacements. If you're scrambling for a last-minute running back for this week, thinking about teams that had Melvin Gordon lined up, obviously we talked about it earlier, no Broncos Patriots for this week. Where do you go on the waiver wire for a streamable last-minute running back this week? Is anybody that you like out there, Jake?
I'm looking down the ranks, right? What might be available right now, and it's gross. I mean, we talked about Dearness Johnson earlier. You could hope that you kind of get like that touchdown. They do use him as much. I think the one other one got dropped in a lot of leagues, and I'll just say because of the change and the fact that Bill O'Brien got fired, and we've been saying, hey, why don't Duke Johnson get more use? Look how good he is. And I don't think Duke Johnson should be a 20-touch guy, but maybe the firing gets Duke Johnson into the 10 to 12 touch range, and in that case, you might have some flex value for you.
Yeah, Duke's one of those guys that's probably widely available in even PPR leagues at this point. How about the wide receiver position, Brandon? If you're hurting at wide receiver with that game being postponed, where do you want to go on the wire?
Yeah, I would say Zach Pascal is getting a good amount of target share with the Colts, stepping in for all the injuries there with Paris Campbell and Michael Pittman. Going against Cleveland. Cleveland's given up a lot of fantasy points, a lot of fantasy production to the wide receiver position, so not a bad go there. We've talked about the Giants. Golden Tate's still widely available. I mean, this offense for the Giants is bad, but Golden Tate can still give you a meaningful fantasy day, I think, in this matchup. Russell Gage, we talked about earlier, talked about Zacchaeus. He's out there. You could go get him, but Russell Gage is like in Yahoo leagues, at least, I think he's like 40% rostered, something right around there. So not a bad way to go there. If you want to go 0%, Jalen Guyton looked pretty good on one catch, 72 yards last. Justin Herbert's got a big arm. I would guess that he's going to take a couple shots deep again this week against the Saints. Maybe you roll out him, but that's a pretty, that's a pretty big dart throw on that one. So the other guys, certainly look for those guys first.
All right. Just a few guys that might be out there in your leagues if you're reeling from the postponement of that Broncos Patriots matchup. Let's talk about trust. Let's talk about trust levels in a bunch of different players. How much faith are you putting in some performances that we saw last week? To do that, we bring on Michael Beller. Let's talk about Odell Beckham Jr. That was probably the best game we've seen from him as a member of the Browns. It was what we were all hoping for going back to maybe the beginning of last season. Jake, are we at the point now where we're starting to believe in this Cleveland passing game? I mean, how much of what we saw last week from Beckham was the aforementioned Dallas defense?
I would say a good portion of it. I think that Beckham, just of the upside alone, he's a 10 out of 10 and a trust that you have to start him every single week. But to get that kind of production, I still think he deserves to be in the mid to low wide receiver 2 range where here's a good comparison before last year. So 2 years ago, Amari Cooper. And I think that's what you're looking at here. You're going to get about 5 or 6 games where you're frustrated as hell. You're going to get 5 or 6 games like last week where this is why you love the guy, the top 10. And then you're going to get the rest that are kind of mixed in there as like a wide receiver 2 to 3 performance. And I think that's what you have to look at because it is such a run-heavy offense. And I think the real problem here is not the offense as a whole, but it's just Baker Mayfield's erratic play.
All right, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust Odell Beckham Jr. right now?
7.
Okay, 7. What do you think, Beller?
Yeah, I think 7's fair. The only thing that would concern me with Odell Beckham is the run heaviness of this offense that we don't think is going to change, even with Nick Chubb out and Kareem Hunt stepping in. This is a Kevin Stefanski brand. It's a stamp. He brought it over from Minnesota to Cleveland with him, so that would concern me a little bit, in addition to what Jake said with Baker's play. But I think a 7 is fair. I think that's a good spot for him, and that still means that you're trotting him out there every single week, pretty much regardless of what the rest of your team looks like.
All right, let's talk about Joe Mixon for a moment. Huge game last week, 151 yards, a couple touchdowns, got a little more involved as a pass catcher with a season-high 6 catches as well. That was a good matchup against Jacksonville. He's got a tougher one today on the road in Baltimore. So how much faith do you have in Joe Mixon based on what we've seen in these last couple of weeks, Beller?
I feel pretty good about Joe Mixon, and really, I'm not even going to go back over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to go back to last week. We've been begging Zach Taylor to let Mixon get more involved in the passing game. They finally do it against Jacksonville, and what happens? And it's not just the 6 catches, Derek. It is the routes run for Joe Mixon in that game. Among the league leaders at running back in routes run for week 4, and that tells you, or at least gives you a good indication of where the Cincinnati offense hopefully is headed. We know Joe Burrow is going to let it rip pretty much every single game, and this is something we talked about with our Bengals beat writer, Jay Morrison, earlier this week. We asked him, is this for real? Is this something that is going to stick around? And Jay said it would be malpractice by Zach Taylor if it is not something that sticks around, if suddenly Giovanni Bernard is back in there handling most of the passing down work for the Bengals this week. So I feel comfortable taking that, going forward with it. My trust level in Joe Mixon, if we're using week 4 as the barometer, is at a strong 9. Feel very good that he is going to remain a big part of this passing game for the rest of the season.
Well, we got a 9 on Joe Mixon. I mean, the volume has been there pretty consistently this season. Do you share that level of confidence in Mixon, Jake?
I'd say not much lower. I'd just say 8, just because I don't trust Taylor that he's going to be consistent at this point. One more game, and I'll be like a 9.5, but we've seen too much of this geo use and the 2-minute huddle and the quick offense, and just until it completely stops and he gets his head out of where like they did last week, then I'll be at like a 9.5.
Got a question including Mixon there from Dominic. Mixon, Jonathan Taylor, or James Conner? Pick 2 in a standard league. What do you think, Jake?
Not Taylor. And I know that's going to pain. Yeah, see, I was going to see if Beller was going to agree, but it just comes down to, we just saw last week, similar to the running back situation we were talking about before, is they had a plan with Hines. It didn't do well at all, but they stuck with it until Taylor is getting what he deserves as like 70% of those touches. Yeah, I don't see how you even go away from Conner at this point.
Yeah, ditto, Jake. 100%. Pains me to say it, but it's true.
Let's talk about Kyler Murray. A weird line from him last week against the Panthers. He was 24 of 31 for 133 yards, 3 TDs, ran for 78 yards. He's rushed for at least 67 yards in each of the first 3 games so far this season. Yeah, he's been great floor-wise there. What's the trust level in Kyler Murray continuing to run that much? Is that just part of who he is, where you can bank on that each and every week at this point? What do you think, Jake?
I think that's what we were hoping for this year, is kind of the Robert Griffin, not quite Lamar Jackson, but Robert Griffin from before, where he got the 800-900 yards, and he can do that, and he is doing that. The biggest concern you would ever have is just if he's going to get hurt because of his size, and Robert Griffin was bigger than is bigger than he is. So the fact is, this is what he's bringing to the offense, and I don't see any reason to change. I don't think Cliff Kingsbury is going to be also like, nah, stay in the pocket and pass more. But it really comes down to, this is why nobody else besides Hopkins, including Drake, is valuable in the passing game.
Yeah, let me just also throw in there really quickly that Kyler Murray, this sounds almost like silly to think about, but Kyler Murray, let's remember, top 10 draft pick in baseball, dude. This is a guy who is very comfortable sliding, staying away from contact. So I think that when we look at running quarterbacks, he's probably among the ones who is less likely to take a big hit and get hurt. He's going to be run all season.
Yeah, I think he's like a trust level 10 for me. I think that's just part of who he is, and right now that's the way that offense is built. I think I like him quite a bit this week in tournaments for what it's worth, too. I think the projected roster rate's really low relative to the other top quarterbacks. Teddy Bridgewater, he's got a great matchup this week. I'm just curious, what do you think about him going up against the Falcons especially? Do you think Teddy Bridgewater can consistently push that 18 to 20 points with room for a bit more in a matchup like this one, Beller?
Yeah, I feel very good about Teddy Bridgewater this week. My trust level on him this week would be at a strong 8 going forward. If he can take advantage of this matchup and prove that he can, it would maybe be just a little bit lower than that. I think at the very least, he's going to be on our stream radar for the entire season in traditional 1QB leagues, in 2 quarterback or flex leagues. I think you feel pretty good about him as your QB too, just plug and play every single week as a starter. A ton of injuries on that Atlanta defense here today. We've seen him almost flip roles for Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore, but the bottom line is no matter who the wide receiver 1 is, he's had a reliable wide receiver 1 delivering for him every single week this season. You've had 399 or more yard games out of Robbie Anderson. Clearly something is working there with the connection. I don't think we're going to see Matt Rule or Joe Brady try to mess with that too much. And another thing that you like that we've seen the last few weeks is that, Mike Davis isn't Christian McCaffrey, but he's doing a damn good Christian McCaffrey impression. So it's not like they suddenly lost that element from their offense either. So I'm giving pretty much 2 thumbs up here, feeling very good about Teddy Bridgewater, not only this week, but going forward for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I'm continuing impressed by how much they're throwing the ball to Mike Davis. I think they'd use him a little bit in the passing game, but they're using him a ton, and that's been a great way to get floor from him each and every week. A few more inactives rolling in. You see Julio Jones there, officially inactive, scrolling by at the bottom of your screen. Henry Ruggs is in for the Raiders for that matchup against the Chiefs. Jordan Akins is out in that Texans-Jags game. Brashad Perriman is out. He's been dealing with an ankle injury. And we talked about a few dinged-up Ravens, Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, Hollywood Brown. They are all good to go for today. Joe Mixon, who we just spoke about a few minutes ago, also good to go. He was dinged up with a minor injury. I think it was a shin injury that slowed him down a little bit in practice this week. No Deshaun Jackson for the Eagles either today. So not a terrible injury week, all things considered, based on the way this season has started. I guess a lot of the key players we're looking for, are already just hurt. So there you go. It's one way to keep the injury report light.
There you go.
Any given week. Let's get to a few more questions here. A lot of those rolling in. Sam wants to know Marquise Brown or Devontae Parker. What do you think about that one, Jake?
It's Parker. I don't know how it's not Parker. This is the same disrespect he got in the offseason. Marquise Brown could be top 5 any given week, but that's what you live with Marquise Brown.
Yeah, a lot.
Jake takes these Parker ones personally. I love it.
Just buy a Parker jersey.
Yeah, can you fit one in there?
Maybe somewhere.
Yeah, you got a little room. Maybe on that left side over there. Pete wants to know McKinnon or Higgins in a full PPR league. That could be a little more complicated if Raheem Mostert goes today. Lighter workload for McKinnon, of course, if that happens. So where do you go with that one, Beller?
Yeah, I'm a little bit more bearish on Jerick McKinnon than Brandon was mentioning a little bit earlier. I would go with Higgins here. I just think that you look at Raheem Mostert, the 49ers told us right away it wasn't a significant injury, but they budgeted, 2 to 3 weeks for him to return, and he's returning basically on that timetable. So taking that at face value, it seems like, 100% maybe a tiny stretch, but it's not like we're going to be talking about a hobbled Raheem Mostert or someone who's not able to basically do everything that the team asks of him. So I think we see a slashed workload for Jerick McKinnon. We've seen T. Higgins take on a much larger role in that Cincinnati offense, and I'm with you with something you said a little bit earlier, Derek. I think the Bengals game ends up getting to be high scoring enough. I think the Bengals can keep it close with Baltimore, with what we've seen from that offense, where maybe they're never really in striking distance to tie or win the game, but they're still at the end of the day putting up 27, 28 points in this one. So I like that Bengals offense today. I think they do cover that spread, and I think T. Higgins is going to have a lot to do with it.
If the Bengals keep it close, it's good for Lamar Jackson in the passing game, too, because they have to kind of keep their foot on the gas, and they're trying to figure it out through the air anyway. They have not really clicked yet, as Jeff Zrebiec said a little bit earlier in the show. Michael wants to know full PPR, pick 2 out of Mostert, Parker, Hollywood Brown, and Josh Kelly. Where do you go on this one, Jake?
I go to make some trades. I mean, if you're having to bench 3 of these guys, come on, or 2 of them, I think the safest option here, I know it's going to sound crazy, but I really do trust that the 49ers are bringing back Mostert. He's ready to roll, and just to see what he's with so far. So I would go Mostert and Kelly is your best 2. If you want a little bit more upside, then it's Mostert, Parker.
All right. Swordfish wants to know, non-PPR league, Zacchaeus, or
You got it right.
Claypool.
I am going with Olamide Zacchaeus in this one. I feel most confident in his role in the offense with Julio Jones out compared with Randall Cobb or Chase Claypool. Claypool's going to be an interesting guy. I know David Ganos wrote him up as one of our week ahead waiver wire guys to be going after, and I think that could definitely be something that plays out today, and I'm going to be watching that Pittsburgh-Philly game with an eye on Chase Claypool. But like I said, Zacchaeus just has clearly the most defined role within his offense. Out of these 3 guys, that makes him a relatively easy choice for me.
I'm going to DDT whoever said Zacchaeus and got that into my head originally. If I forgot who it was, too, by the way. Mini Jordan, full PPR league, choose 2. Deontay, OBJ, Chark, Dearness, Justin Jackson, or Devin Singletary. What do you think, Jake?
This is another one. What do you guys do? Kudos to you guys for listening to us to have rosters like this, I guess would be the thing. I don't think you need to risk Singletary at this point. Normally, I would say he's fine to use, but because of those other options, it sounds maybe nuts to go 2 wide receivers. I would just start Chark and OBJ.
Yeah, I think there's enough there where you go ahead and just take the 2 best receivers. Don't mess around with the running backs, especially they're both in timeshares, right? I mean, that's the drawback of those 2 guys. Jacob wants to know, hey, guys, stick with Matt Ryan at quarterback this week or roll with Drew Brees? What do you think, Beller?
I'm going to go with Brees ever so slightly. I feel pretty good about both of these guys this week, but it does sound like we're getting Michael Thomas back, that Drew Brees is getting Michael Thomas back. Of course, we don't know that as we are all sitting here saying this, but all indications are that he's going to be back. And 2, this hits the timeline that the Saints set for him when he first suffered that ankle injury. So Drew Brees with Michael Thomas, with Alvin Kamara, perhaps with Jared Cook, in a game where they're favored by more than a touchdown, going up against a Chargers defense that doesn't necessarily scare you, I will lean toward him ever so slightly. I would say if my advice doesn't sway you and you still want to go Matt Ryan, I don't think it's crazy. I think these guys are very close to one another this week.
That is a good problem to have, but it's a difficult question to answer on a regular basis. Sarah's in a half-point PPR flex situation. Mostert, Woods, Justin Jefferson, or Antonio Gibson, Jake?
I like the easier questions because these are all great options. Again, it's half PPR. Wow. I got to go the wide receivers. Just because Mostert, like the reason why, to explain for everybody, is so Mostert's coming back and I do trust him, but you avoid the risk that maybe he doesn't get a full workload. Antonio Gibson's been doing a lot with a little bit of change to Kyle Allen. Maybe that goes sideways. So when you have Woods and Jefferson, I don't know that you necessarily need to risk the running backs being riskier than most would be.
And I think with Woods and the Rams offense, the implied total there is close to 30, right? I mean, like they're gonna score a lot this week, so there's quite a bit of goodness to have.
And if you're looking to get the ball out of Goff's hands quickly because of this matchup, that's more Woods than Kupp.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. So a lot of love for Robert Woods. It is the time at the show in which we say goodbye to our friend Jake. Jake is going to have all of his updated rankings up on the site.
And clean armpits.
Very clean armpits.
Oh, both
as
of
well.
them. Both of them.
Both sides.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Of course. Clean.
Didn't Kramer it up where you accidentally
Swimmer
only shaved
armpits.
one side and not the other. I like that.
All right, Jake. Good stuff as always. Enjoy week 5. That is Jake Seeley, the all-in kid. Get all of his updated rankings, the waiver column that comes out every week, matchup stuff, everything you need, just $1 a month at theathletic.com/cheat sheet. If you want those clean armpits, check out our friends over at Manscaped. I can't speak to going that route, but let's talk about Jock Market for a little bit. Some players that we like on Jock Market this week. Beller, if you don't have the app yet, be sure to go get the app in the App Store. Android is coming soon. You can start making money this week. A lot of people like the Giants going up against that Dallas defense. So if you're going to look for someone on Jock Market who might be a little bit underpriced this week, who's in that game, where are you going?
Yeah, I like Darius Slayton this week. I think that he's the guy with the ceiling for the Giants. I heard you guys talking about Golden Tate earlier, and I do think that there's reason to buy into him this week too. But Darius Slayton is a guy who's going to make big plays down the field. Darius Slayton is the sort of guy who is going to pay off more likely in a jock market scenario because you have to get yourself inside the top 60 at the position, and he just has that ceiling to get yourself inside the top 60. That's what I like about Darius Slayton this week. And I'm not someone who is buying the Giants keeping this game close. I think Dallas's offense is just way too good. And finally, it's not like the defense is going to be a huge liability because I don't think the Giants are built to take full advantage of that Dallas defense. But I do think there's going to be plenty of volume for the Giants passing game in this one. So I like Darius Slayton a lot. I think he's going to be a little bit undervalued in that jock market pricing. And so he's someone who I came to right away. Scrolling up and down the list, the first name that jumped out at me was Darius Slayton because of the volume, because of the matchup, and because of the likely price once we start this game.
I know we talked about some players we liked from a DFS perspective on our Friday podcast, and Gardner Minshew in this Jags passing game was one that you seem to be going after. So what is it about this matchup that gives you so much confidence in Minshew this week?
It's not necessarily even just the matchup. It's just the fact that they've really asked a lot out of Gardner Minshew and James Robinson. I mean, those two guys have carried pretty much the entire load for the Jacksonville offense this season. I mean, you look at what Gardner Minshew's done. You've got 2 3-touchdown games. You've got 3 multi-touchdown games. You've got 2 300-yard games. And every single game, he's given you at least 19 yards on the ground. And that last number doesn't jump out at you in a huge way. But we're talking about basically a floor of 20 rushing yards, half of a passing touchdown in standard scoring fantasy leagues for the quarterback position. And he comes in just giving you that. It's almost like you start the game with half a touchdown on your stat line for Gardner Minshew. Basically, it's always there for him. And I mean, the worst game he had from a statistical volume standpoint, he completed 19 to 20 passes against an Indianapolis defense that were all ready to anoint as one of the very best in the league. I think Gardner Minshew has proven himself to be a matchup-proof quarterback, and people still want to treat him as this cute story with the mustache and the jean shorts and all of this stuff. But the guy's a top 10 quarterback. I mean, he has been a top 10 quarterback this year, 9th in overall scoring, 12th in points per game. I think that's who we need to square ourselves with Gardner Minshew being, and people still don't want to fully get there. You've got a fully healthy DJ Chark. You've got James Robinson out of the backfield proving that he can be a threat there. I just really think Minshew is going to be someone we treat as a top 10 quarterback in a lot of weeks this season.
One game we haven't talked a lot about yet on today's show, the Chiefs hosting the Raiders. They're 11.5-point favorites. The over-under is sitting at 54.5. Plenty of fantasy goodness always in the Chiefs offense. Curious to see if the Raiders are able to sort of keep pace in that one. I know from a DFS perspective, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is kind of a cash game staple. Beller, do you like him on Jock Market this weekend?
I do. The matchup and the volume are just too great to ignore here. And sometimes you have to go that way, right? I mean, Jock Market obviously incentivizes you finding underpriced players, but someone doesn't need to be bottom of the barrel cheap to be underpriced. And I think we're still seeing that with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I am someone who wrote him up in our Week 5 fantasy roundtable as a guy who is the most overrated player in fantasy to this point of the season. And I stand by that, but you can't ignore the volume that he's had. 25 carries in Week 1, 20 carries in Week 3, 16 carries last week, 8 targets in Week 2, 6 targets in Week 3, just 3 targets last week. But we're talking about a guy who pretty much you can lock in for 20 opportunities every single week to touch the ball in a Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid offense. There really is no way to go wrong. The numbers should be bigger. The numbers should be bigger to this point of the season. No question about that, but the opportunity has been there every single week. Darrell Williams really not taking away much of his opportunity, and this Vegas defense really isn't one that's going to strike fear in the hearts of the Chiefs. No defense does, but this one even less so. Chiefs are favored by nearly 2 touchdowns in this game. I think they cover that spread. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire ultimately has a lot to do with it. When you're getting the opportunity that he is getting in this Chiefs offense, eventually you're going to break through for a big game. We saw it out of him in Week 1 with that 138-yard performance on the ground with a touchdown. It's got to happen again. This is the right matchup for it. I do think that Edwards-Helaire ends up having a top 5 running back performance this week.
Now, if you're looking for shootouts, Sunday night should deliver. The Vikings going on the road to Seattle. Over-under at 56. Seahawks 7-point favorites against the Vikings. Who stands out to you as a good value in that game?
Yeah, for me, it's Adam Thielen. This one really doesn't require too much explaining. This Seattle defense has been gotten through the air every single week this season. And on the other side, Russell Wilson is forcing offenses to keep getting the Seattle defense. We've talked so much about Justin Jefferson over the last couple of weeks, and with good reason. But something else he has done is free up some of the field for Adam Thielen. 2 weeks ago, Justin Jefferson's coming out party, not a big game for Thielen, but he did get in the end zone. Last week, 10 targets, 8 catches, 114 yards, and another touchdown. Adam Thielen probably has the quietest 4 touchdowns in the NFL this season. No reason that that's going to slow down tonight against Seattle. Love him across the board, any sort of fantasy context, including Jock Market. Adam Thielen is a great play in Week 5.
Yeah, that game should deliver on the hype tonight. Love that matchup for Adam Thielen. Be sure to take control of your fantasy experience and download Jock Market now in the App Store. The Android app is coming soon. Let's get to a few more questions here as we roll through this show. Got one from Kevin in a PPR league. Sit one of Bell, Kelly, or Slayton. So who do you sit out of that trio, Beller?
Man, that is tough. I just went on and on and on, right, about how much I like Darius Slayton this week, and I do, but I think there's guaranteed volume for those 2 running backs, and it is hard to turn away from that guaranteed volume. Even in a full PPR league. So I'm going with the backs. I do think that Slayton has a higher ceiling than the backs. So if you are already in a position where you feel like you need to shoot for upside, I could see benching Bell just because, we're not fully sure how healthy he is in favor of Slayton. My play personally, I'm playing both backs.
All right, got a question here from Baby Eric. Gonna need Jake to come back and explain that avatar. Full PPR league, J.K. Dobbins, Jalen Guyton, or Isaiah Ford as a flex. Who do you like best out of that group, Brandon?
Well, I think Guyton's your home run play, but he's not going to be high volume. It's not a great matchup against the Saints on Monday night. I think the safer play, and it's weird to say it, is probably J.K. Dobbins. You can imagine a scenario where Baltimore gets ahead on Cincinnati, and they lean on that backfield. I mean, who's it going to be? It could be Gus Edwards, but Dobbins feels like for maybe 5 to 6 carries and 3-4 catches, get 8 to 10 touches out of him. That might be the best route to go here, as opposed to hoping for the Hail Mary from Guyton.
Yeah, I like some of those really deep leagues where you've got very difficult kind of Hail Mary sorts of questions at the bottom of the roster. Yeah. Kevin wants to know in a half-point PPR league, Kelly, Zach Pascal, or Deebo Samuel. What do you think, Beller?
Yeah, I'm going to go Joshua Kelly here again, the guaranteed volume. I did for a second there as I was reading it consider Deebo Samuel 1 more week removed from the foot injury, 1 week healthier. He gets Jimmy Garoppolo back this week. But I still think that the guaranteed volume with Joshua Kelly and the fact that it really does feel as though he is sliding into the Melvin Gordon role in the Chargers offense that Gordon vacated when he signed with Denver. There's always volume in that role. There's plenty of goal line work in that role, even in a matchup where the Chargers are catching more than a touchdown against the Saints on Monday Night Football. Feel good about Kelly's touch floor. 15 touches as a minimum, I think, for him on Monday night. Hard to turn away from that sort of volume.
SP wants to know, move James Robinson for Derrick Henry in a half PPR league. Is it a no-brainer, or is it actually a close trade? Definitely not the kind of thing that we would have thought going into like week 2 or week 3, but James Robinson looks legit, and as Beller said earlier, he's a big part of that offense, Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it. It's not as crazy as it sounds at face value here. I mean, James Robinson is involved in that passing game. The half PPR setup gets him closer there. But remember, Derrick Henry, just look at the last couple of years, he always has his best for last. He's the kind of guy that just second half of the year, defenders are less and less interested in trying to really tackle this guy. So I just think it's still Derrick Henry for me. You'd like to see him get involved in that passing game. It hasn't happened. But, man, 20, 25 carries. And, again, as the season wears along, we've seen that repeatedly, that Henry is just a beast down the stretch. So I think the safer floor is Derrick Henry and a guy that you can feel good about going into your fantasy postseason.
We got another question here from O. Tejada in a half-point PPR league. Which of these 2 running backs do you start? Miles Sanders, Dearness Johnson, Justin Jackson, or Nyheim Hines? Guys, I think Miles Sanders kind of is a cut above the rest there, so it's really choose one of those last 3. Sanders definitely gets that first spot, but who gets the second one, Beller?
I'm going to go with Justin Jackson here. I can explain away the other two backs, I think, relatively easily. Nyheim Hines, we just haven't seen it from him since week 1. I don't see why we would think it would be any different. I agree with Jake on D'Ernest Johnson. I think last week, as good as he looked, was a confluence of factors that are not going to be there every single week. It felt like a one-off game. You had Kareem Hunt with the groin injury all week, so you had all 4 backs active, and then you had a game where the Browns were leading by 27 points for a big chunk of the second half, and you were feeding D'Ernest Johnson to milk the clock because we're not going to do it with our superstar running back who had a groin injury for 72 hours this week. Why are we going to do that? You can't count on that every single week. Maybe the Browns prove us wrong this week and D'Ernest Johnson is in something of a Nick Chubb role. I just don't think he is. Justin Jackson looks like a one-for-one replacement in terms of role and usage for Austin Eckler. That's music to your ears in a half PPR league, so I'll pair him up with Miles Sanders.
Got one more question here before we get to our latest installment of Brit's Picks. This one comes from Caleb. Brandon, would you play Deshaun Watson over Josh Allen? Is Watson at a high enough level where you avoid the risk that rolling Allen out there on Tuesday night brings to the table?
Absolutely. We just got some news this morning. The Jaguars are going to be doing Josh Allen, Miles Jack, their top pick, CJ Henderson, their corner. It's a great time to have this issue with Josh Allen. I mean, if there ever is a great time, but if you have somebody else you can use like a Deshaun Watson, like Watson set up very well against Jacksonville this week. And, they're probably going to try some things that we haven't seen in the first 4 weeks. Maybe that gets them really untracked. I think they should have Watson running more, take advantage of that skill set that he has. But regardless, I think it's a really good opportunity against this banged up Jaguars defense to go ahead and roll with Watson this week over Allen.
Yeah, I think the difference in where you'd have them ranked is so small that avoid the risk, play Watson. You might have just as much ceiling there, given how bad that Jags defense is and how banged up that Jags defense is. We'll check in with you guys again in just a few minutes. Let's bring on our guy, Ed Mallion, for the latest installment of Brit's Picks. This week, Ed, the focus is going to be looking for last-minute help. We got postponements, of course, if you're just joining us. No Broncos-Patriots this week. No Lions and Packers by design, of course, with bye weeks. And, of course, some uncertainty with Bills-Titans going on Tuesday night. So, first off, Ed, good morning. And I got to ask you, where are you turning for some help if you're scrambling for a quarterback on the wire today?
Well, it's a mess, isn't it? So this whole COVID situation means we've got to dig deep. But I think that's kind of one of the most fun things about fantasy is trying to find that guy who's on the waiver wire or deep down on a bench somewhere that you can bring in who's going to get you points to win this week. And this week it's going to be, a few players that I don't think are very good, actually. And the first one is Kirk Cousins. If Russell Wilson is cooking, then Kirk Cousins is going to have to get in the kitchen or go home. So it's going to be a game tonight where they're slinging it. I think Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, if you're owning those guys, you're loving tonight because Seattle's defense has not been that good this year. They haven't really looked like stopping people. They've been overpowering people with offense led by Wilson. Kirk Cousins might not lead Minnesota to victory, but he could easily lead your team to victory tonight. I think 25 to 30 points is completely within his wheelhouse, even though we've seen Kirk kind of deteriorating over the last year to 18 months. But I think people realizing just what his level might be.
Yeah, it's almost like at his best, he's out there not making mistakes. He does have the ability to take the occasional shot downfield, and they've certainly got more speed on the field now with Justin Jefferson as well. But that Seattle defense is one to pick on each and every week. I'm curious, what's your trust level right now with Justin Herbert? He's got the matchup against the Saints. It looks like Michael Thomas might go in that one, so the Saints offense might be firing on all cylinders. Do you trust Herbert as a guy that can lead that Chargers offense and at least play catch-up on a week-to-week basis and sort of give us a nice floor as fantasy players?
I do. It's a huge test, obviously. It's probably the biggest test of his career. I think I was watching a show this week, and they said he only needs to have a few moments in this game to probably secure the starting job for the next few years, and I think that's true. I think that if he can look good against a really good Saints defense, they're good front-to-back Saints. Don't sleep on that defense at all. And I like what they can do. I like the fact that he's got big targets like Mike Williams and people that he can sling it to. Hopefully Mike Williams is healthy. But Justin Herbert also has that rushing. He has that rushing ability. And I think, they're going to scheme up some ways that he can get in the end zone himself. I like his ability to maybe pick up 40, 50 yards in every game as well as a touchdown. So if I'm looking at the waiver wire and Justin Herbert's available, Kirk Cousins isn't, I'm not scared about taking Justin Herbert on against the Saints. It's going to be a bit of a gunfight. And if anything, I think he can sling it more than Drew Brees these days.
Man, Justin Herbert rushing ability just makes me cringe as a Wisconsin graduate, though, after what he did.
The Rose Bowl. Don't talk about the Rose Bowl again. I can't.
Kills me every single time. Let's shift our focus over to the running back position. A little more thin than usual. People chased Dearness Johnson and Justin Jackson earlier in the week on waivers. I think Duke Johnson was mentioned earlier in the show as a possible sort of Hail Mary if you're scrambling. Maybe he's more involved with Bill O'Brien gone. Is there anybody else out there at running back that might be floating around that you think could be useful?
I just picked up Duke Johnson for Rex Burkhead, but the guy I'm actually going to go for here is the same guy I went for last week. I said Antonio Gibson is the guy to own in Washington, but the guy to play might be McKissick. Now, Gibson outscored McKissick, despite McKissick getting 7 catches last week because of the fumble for McKissick. He had 7 catches, he had a few carries in a similar sort of game line, a similar sort of script that we'd expect this week against the Los Angeles Rams. I think if he can produce on his opportunities this week, McKissick is a viable spot starter. I mean, if you can get any running back at this stage who's going to get 7 catches, especially in PPR leagues, then that's something that's incredibly attractive at this point. So JD McKissick, absolutely. I also, as I say, like Duke Johnson, just because, the change of coaching, we don't know what that's going to be. And also like Houston going forward, if David Johnson gets injured, that's a whole backfield you're probably going to take over.
Yeah, and maybe with Bill O'Brien gone, the Texans offense pumps the brakes a little bit on David Johnson having an overwhelming share of the touches in that backfield. Looking for some wide receiver help this week. Who really catches your eye at that position, Ed?
You have to have some balls, as we say in England, to do this. But Khalif Raymond is the guy because it's a Tuesday kickoff. If this doesn't go, then you're screwed. But this is interesting because AJ Brown might play. If AJ Brown doesn't play, they've only got like 2 receivers, and one of these is Khalif Raymond. We've seen Khalif Raymond. He's the second choice receiver if Brown goes. Brown could be a decoy. Brown might not be fully healthy. If Brown doesn't go, Khalif Raymond is probably the number one. We've seen he can be a deep threat. We've seen he has the trust of Ryan Tannehill, which are 2 huge ingredients, I think, when you're just trying to pick a random guy who's going to possibly get targets. This guy will get targets. We know he can hold them in. It's a winning combination. There's the added bonus of the Bills being without top cornerback Tre'Davious White, who, as we know, can lock down even the best receivers. So Khalif Raymond is my random dart throw at receiver this week, and I like him to put up double-digit points.
Got 13 targets the last 2 weeks from Greg Olsen in this Seattle offense. You like him as a tight end dart this week. I mean, how much of that is just this game being fireworks back and forth all night?
Yeah, that's it. I think that we're going to see the ball going back and forth. I like Greg Olsen. I like him as a person. I like the fact that he's getting these targets now. I think 6 against Dallas, 7 against Cleveland last week. You're going to be touchdown dependent if you're rolling the dice on Greg Olsen approaching kickoff on Sunday. I think we all know that. But you're also touchdown dependent at tight end if you're betting on anyone outside the top 5 in the position. Is that fair? So, you're touchdown dependent. Olsen has the targets. He has the trust. And with that, usually, you'd hope, would come the touchdowns. So if I'm throwing a dart at any of these tight ends, and, there are loads of those on the waiver wire, then Greg Olsen's probably mine for this Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, if you're relying on a TD, you just want the game with the most points that are going to be scored, right? That's a pretty good line of logic to follow. Ed, great stuff as always. Good luck to you in week 5. Look forward to catching up with you again next Sunday.
Good to see you guys.
That's Ed Malyon with the latest installment of Brit's Picks. It's time to move on to Fill in the Blank. It's my favorite segment of this show. We're going to bring back both Brandon Funston and Michael Beller, try to answer a few of these blanks, but also maybe dive into a few related topics with these as well. So here's the first one this week, guys. Kenyon Drake will score blank fantasy points against the Jets this week. We'll assume a half PPR league. What do you think, Beller?
You know what? I'm still buying Kenyon Drake a little bit. I think that they can get him a little bit more involved in the offense this week. So I'm going to give him 12.2 points, and that's going to have to assume he gets a touchdown. You can't really go much higher than that. Chase Edmonds does loom as a threat for this Cardinals offense to Kenyon Drake, and I would be concerned about Kenyon Drake if I spent that late first, early second round pick to get him on my team. But I still think there's enough there and that they need someone. Someone's got to step up alongside DeAndre Hopkins. It can't just be him. So I think Kenyon Drake bounces back a little bit this week and get you somewhere in the neighborhood of 12.5 points for you in week 5.
We could turn this into an over-under at this point if you think that number's close, Brandon. What do you think? 12.5 for Kenyon Drake?
Well, I had written down 8.5 to 9, which is not – I was like, okay, I can see about 75 yards and maybe a couple receptions, so 8.5.
Touchdowns all you need to get there then.
The touchdown that's the X factor. He has one on the year. It was in week 1. Not a lot of opportunities for running backs at the goal line so far for Arizona. So, if I gave him half a touchdown, I'd probably be close to where Beller's at.
This is interesting, though, because Kenyon Drake's under 4 yards per carry in these first 4 games. That's where he was in his first 6 games last year with the Dolphins before Arizona acquired him. And they have a pretty capable backup in Chase Edmonds. I mean, if you're in a league where you can make a trade for a guy like Edmonds, do you go ahead and do that under the at least legitimate possibility, we'll say, that Edmonds could possibly overtake Kenyon Drake at some point? Is that within the range of outcomes for either of you guys?
I think Edmonds is a great guy to go after right now. And I say that, even having the confidence in Kenyon Drake that I do, you always have to leave room in your fantasy thinking for believing that you might be wrong about something. And if I'm wrong about Kenyon Drake and Chase Edmonds does end up taking over this workload, I mean, it's going to be a huge guy in fantasy leagues. I don't think one guy is going to fully pull away from the other, but I do see a future in which Chase Edmonds has a meaningful enough role that you feel decent about playing him once the heavy bye weeks start, especially with all the uncertainty that we now have to square ourselves with. We're probably going to be living with the rest of the season.
And I think you got to recall that Cliff Kingsbury in preseason, I believe it was August, said Chase Edmonds is a starting running back in the NFL. So maybe it's foreshadowing he's going to be a starting running back in the Arizona backfield. But I think that means that if Kenyon Drake struggles for a while, there's absolutely confidence in his head coach that Chase Edmonds could come in and, at least be given a shot to do better.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. It's hard to trade for a running back who actually has the job. Not so difficult to go out and get a guy like Chase Edmonds who might be a Kenyon Drake fumble or one more disappointing performance away from taking on a larger share of that workload. Let's go to the next one. Blank will lead the Panthers pass catchers in fantasy points today. We'll keep it with the half PPR format. Who do you think it's going to be, Brandon?
Well, I'm using Robbie Anderson in a couple one-and-done leagues where you can choose a receiver or a lineup and use them one time, and then you can't use them again. But in the back of my mind, there is the thought that this could be DJ Moore's opportunity. And DJ Moore, people are down on him, but he's getting targets. He just hasn't scored a touchdown. That he hasn't had a high efficiency of receptions on those targets because weirdly he's playing the Robbie Anderson role that we all thought Robbie Anderson was going to have, which is going to be the vertical threat guy. You look at average depth of target, DJ Moore is well above his career norm, and Robbie Anderson's the guy who's getting the short range targets. So if that continues, I think you have to go week in and week out saying Robbie Anderson's a better play. But this could be the week that some of those deep shots of DJ Moore actually connect. So I like both of these guys. I'll still lean Robbie Anderson.
What do you think, Beller?
Yeah, I'm going to lean Robbie Anderson, too. It's basically wish casting if you want to say DJ Moore is going to outscore him with what we've seen from these guys in the first 4 weeks, not just only in terms of production, but in terms of usage. And you guys have heard me say this a couple times this week, so I apologize to you, to you, Brandon, and to you, DVR, for repeating myself. But for people who haven't heard it, I think we need to start thinking about the fact that given this extreme change in role that we've never seen from either DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson, there's a possibility that Carolina is saying, we think pound for pound, Robbie Anderson is our best receiver. And even though he's a deep guy in an ideal world, that's not what Teddy Bridgewater brings to the table. So we need to line up our best receiver with our quarterback skill set. And that's why we've seen this dramatic shift in role for both of these receivers. And if that's truly what this Carolina offense thinks or the Carolina decision makers think, then we're going to see a lot more wide receiver 1 weeks out of Robbie Anderson and not as many out of DJ Moore as we expected.
I kind of wonder if we get to a point, once Christian McCaffrey comes back, maybe it's harder for the Carolina passing game to sustain both Anderson and Moore with this sort of target share. Hopefully we can get a better feel for who truly is the number one, but it looks like Robbie Anderson has quietly become at least 1A to DJ Moore's 1B in Carolina. Jorge has got a question. Cooper Kupp, Robbie Anderson, or Keenan Allen? He has to sit one. Who should he sit, Brandon?
Well, I guess Cooper Kupp, although I have him ranked very highly as well. I just really like your other options there a little bit better. And if you want to think about, well, you go for Cooper Kupp, well, Chase Young's back, Jared Goff, we've seen him before. Kind of, when he has a lot of stuff flying around him, he can be a little bit rattled. So I guess you can say, I think the biggest potential fly in the ointment would be that Washington front line making life miserable for Jared Goff, and that in turn affecting Cooper Kupp. Yeah,
that could be the one way it goes sideways for the Rams offense this week. Let's go to our next fill in the blank. Daniel Jones will rank blank among fantasy quarterbacks in week 5. What do you think, Beller?
I'll say 20th as just sort of a break-even point almost for what our expectations should be for Daniel Jones. You can try and explain away some of the things that have happened for the Giants this year. No Saquon Barkley, no Sterling Shepard for now the majority of the time that they've been out there. At some point, you just have to say, though, this is a bad offense with a quarterback who is not taking the necessary steps forward in his second year in the league. And that's, I think, where this Giants team sits. We love talking matchup in the fantasy world, and we should love talking matchup, but matchup can't be everything. The player, the team, the offense, they need to be capable of taking advantage of that matchup, and we just haven't seen it from Daniel Jones in this Giants offense this season. So I wouldn't expect anything better than just barely inside a top 20 performance.
I have him 21st, so I'm right there with you.
Wow. So you guys are pushing back on the love that Daniel Jones has been getting in the DFS.
It's not all
community
about
this week.
matchup. It's a lot about matchup, but it's not all about matchup.
All right, let's go to the next one. A blank stack will win somebody $1 million in DFS this weekend. Who do you think it's going to be, Brandon?
Here's an interesting one because everybody, you're going to say Minnesota or Carolina. We talk about the Teddy Bridgewater, Robbie Anderson, Mike Davis, and everybody's going to be on Minnesota with Justin Jefferson and Kirk Cousins. You win by going against the grain, and I think a potential stack that could win you some money would maybe be Justin Herbert on Monday night. Nice. With Keenan Allen. Maybe you throw a Joshua Kelly in there, and he's maybe not getting enough value yet because he's going to inherit more of the Austin Eckler role than being given credit for. So I just think there's potential for points from the Chargers. You got to trust your eyes on Justin Herbert that he's legit good, because I think he is. And I don't think this, the 3 straight 300-yard games is an aberration. Big arm, potential for a lot of points in that game, and maybe not the stack that everybody is jumping on. So that's how you usually win these things.
What do you think, Doug?
I like that one, but I'm going to go back to the team I've already talked about a few times. Give me the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. At last check, we had an over-under sitting at 54.5. It's been there all week, so we could easily see this game get into the mid-50s. This Houston defense has just flatly been bad this year, and I don't know if we should expect it to get any better, even with the jolt in the arm that a Bill O'Brien firing could provide for this team. I already sang a paean to Gardner Minshew, so I don't think I need to run that back, but a very easy stack that you could do. And you can get 4 fantasy viable guys from Jacksonville into your lineup. That is a stack, right? Minshew, James Robinson, DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault. Love them all. Really like this Jacksonville stack. I think the Jaguars have a chance to pull off the upset and win this game. I definitely think they keep it within the 6.5 point spread that you're seeing on it. Give me the Jaguars. I really, really like them today, as has become clear, I think, over the last half hour or so.
Yeah, if you wanted to go with a third pass catcher instead of a running back, Keelan Cole under 5K on DraftKings, that opens up a little more chalk for you at running back around your low-owned Jags if you want to go that route. I'm still talking myself into a Washington football stack because it's so cheap. You can do anything you want. But if you don't want to go that far off the board, San Francisco with Jimmy Garoppolo coming back, Debo being healthier, George Kittle being great, and chalky at tight end, I'd still play him. And then Brandon Ayuk could probably round that out pretty easily. Basically fading the San Francisco running backs for this week with that great matchup against Miami. We got one more fill in the blank here. Blank will be the most popular pickup on the waiver wire on Tuesday. Let's go to you first, Beller.
I think there are a couple of guys who are going to be in the mix for this, but I'm actually just going to go kind of easy here. I think people are going to have this week off for New England to take a look at this offense and realize that Damiere Byrd has 9+ targets in 2 of the team's last 3 games. So I'm not saying it's something that's going to happen for him this week. I think that we're starting to see the waiver wire settle to a point where it's going to be injuries or nothing creating opportunities for players. And so you're going to be looking for opportunities that have already been created but have maybe been a little bit overlooked. We see that from Damiere Byrd, having had those 2 games with at least 9 targets. He got 10 actually in their last game and ended up having 80 yards in that one. And outside of Julian Edelman, I think they're still looking for someone to be a consistent pass catcher for Cam Newton. Damiere Byrd can be that guy. The fact that they have another week off probably means that Cam is healthy and ready to go when they return to the field. I think Byrd can be a sneaky pickup this week, especially with the opportunities really not being there across the board in most fantasy leagues now.
I'm gonna kind of repeat the guys that I mentioned for deep wide receiver plays. If you get stuck with, AJ Brown maybe not playing or something like that. That was Golden Tate. That was Russell Gage. That was Zach Pascal. I brought them up because they are widely available still. I think they're in good opportunities this week with whether there's injury around them or the map is great or both. And so I'll say Pascal, Gage, Tate, one of those guys has a big game. People remember, they have a pretty decent role in their offenses. And and maybe so one of those guys bubbles up, but this is a tough one. So I'll go back with those guys.
Yeah, it's tough to predict the waiver wire a week ahead of time, but figured that was a fun one to mix in there for the last fill in the blank of week 5. Let's get to a few more questions from our viewers. CFC fan wants to know Mostert or Le'Veon Bell in a full PPR league. What do you think, Beller?
Yeah, very close. Two guys who I believe their teams would not be bringing back if they weren't ready to go and do, what they ask of them. So I will lean ever so slightly in Raheem Mostert's direction here. But I think both guys are pretty strong plays if you have realistic RB2 expectations for them.
Carter wants to know McKinnon or Edmonds at a half-point PPR league. I mean, Mostert potentially being back in there does crowd up the backfield a little bit, Brandon, but do you still see enough of a floor with McKinnon to give him the edge over Edmonds for this week?
I do. He's been highly efficient with his touches. Hasn't been huge touch week in and week out. It's been building because Mostert's been out in the last couple weeks, but McKinnon's looked strong all year. And I think I still feel good about at least a dozen touches. And against Miami and the way that this backfield runs, I would rather take my chances on that. I'm not sure Edmonds gets to that point unless Kenyon Drake really struggles out of the gates in this one. And there's something crazy like he gets benched at halftime. But to me, I just feel like McKinnon's a safer play and has some really nice upside in this contest.
All right. CT Fox wants to know in a standard league for a flex spot, Antonio Gibson or Deontay Johnson. What do you think, Beller?
Got a little bit of concern about how the move to Kyle Allen changes Washington's offense, but Antonio Gibson has been ever so slightly increasing his role, his production, week by week. You've seen 13 carries in 2 of the last 3 games. Last week you saw him have his biggest game as a receiver, 4 catches on 5 targets for 82 yards. I really like that. I think he gets himself at least 15 to 17 opportunities in this game, meaning carries plus targets, and that volume is going to be impossible to ignore when you're talking about a good but not great locked-in wide receiver fantasy starter like Deontay Johnson. Give me Antonio Gibson.
Got a flex question here from Nashiz. It's DJ Moore, David Johnson, or Jerick McKinnon. He is also going to have Teddy Bridgewater in the lineup if that influences your decision. Who do you put in that flex spot, Brandon?
I always say, I'm always just put these guys out there, look at them in a vacuum. I don't care about the stack. I will say that I think McKinnon has the safest floor and DJ Moore has the highest ceiling. Great matchup for him. I've been saying that, he's been getting shots downfield more than he usually does. And a couple of those could pay off. So just depending on which direction you want to go, if you want to play it safe, McKinnon, if you want to really roll for, high upside, I would think you go DJ Moore.
Got a full PPR question from Josh. We got Tyler Boyd, who might see a lot of Marlon Humphrey today in that matchup against the Ravens, or Jamison Crowder. What do you think, Beller?
Very tough. I want to start both of them. I think both these guys have top 20 upside certainly this week, and I think in a vacuum, both are going to be started if we're talking about evenly spread wide receiver resources. I lean toward Tyler Boyd here. Definitely admit that Crowder has the higher ceiling, but Tyler Boyd's been doing it every single week, really, for this Bengals team. He's clearly the wide receiver 1 there, and again, we've talked about it a few times now. No fear from Zach Taylor for letting Joe Burrow rip it 45, 50. We've seen him get up to 60 pass attempts in a game this season. There's going to be plenty of volume for Tyler Boyd. And again, matchup can't be everything in the good way. Matchup also can't be everything in a bad way. Tyler Boyd is ready for this matchup. We could be saying, hey, this is a tough matchup for Marlon Humphrey, not just for Tyler Boyd.
If you get Jerick McKinnon added to that mix, do you go McKinnon over Boyd and Crowder? What do you think?
I don't. I would go McKinnon over Crowder, but I would not go McKinnon over Boyd. I think we need to be thinking about Tyler Boyd as someone who is locked in as an every single week fantasy starter with what he's done over really the last, and we're going on 3 years of Tyler Boyd being a legit fantasy player for us and what the way they use this passing game in Cincinnati is. Give me Boyd.
All right, we got Montana Loose Cannon, Miles Sanders over under 12 fantasy points in a half-point PPR league. What do you think, Brandon?
Oh, Beller's telling me over on this one. This is tough. I actually think Miles Sanders is good for probably around 80 yards from scrimmage. I think he'll get, maybe 4 catches. I think, man, it's all about the touchdown here. I think he'll be close without the touchdown. I would say like 10. And then you just got to factor in your faith in him scoring a touchdown. I'll say he comes in. If I'm actually walking into Vegas and making this bet, I'm going to bet the under.
Ooh, boo. Over. Who else is going to catch passes? Greg Ward?
Oh, they're a mess right now.
Listen, Pittsburgh's close to my survivor pick. I just think Philadelphia could be in a big world of hurt. There may not be a whole lot of catches to be had.
Speaking of survivor, let's talk about your guys' survivor picks for this week. We'll go to you first, Beller. Who are you turning to?
Yeah, I'm not going to make this one too hard this week. I'm not going to try to outsmart anyone. Give me the Chiefs if I've got them. Just can't see the Raiders really making that game any sort of threat. If I don't have the Chiefs, I will happily pivot to the Ravens. I'm betting on the Bengals. I will tell you that. I have literal dollars on the Bengals. I have picked them in my Super Contest League. I think they keep that game within 2 touchdowns. There is a big window for them to keep it within 2 touchdowns and also for the Ravens to win this game relatively comfortably. So that's the order I go. Chiefs if I have them. Ravens if I don't have the Chiefs available.
I got to ask a quick question from both of you guys pertaining to the Chiefs. Is that defense legit? Like the Raiders, usually you could look at the Chiefs and say, okay, whoever's playing the Chiefs, they're going to get garbage time production. That really hasn't been the case so far. So, Brandon, when you watch this Chiefs defense, do you see them being good enough to take kind of an average or slightly above average offense like the Raiders and actually just shutting them down completely?
Anybody who has strong up front, has a strong pass rush is legit in my mind. That's why we keep bringing up Washington. Not a great team, but man, we respect that front line, and it can be a mess for any offense any given week. So yeah, I think this is an absolutely legit defense. They got playmakers there as well. So, but that said, I kind of sort of like the Raiders offense this week, maybe in a catch-up mode. Maybe something similar to what they were able to do against the Saints, not win the game, but just kind of play it close. And guys like Darren Waller and Josh Jacobs, they have some playmakers themselves. But do I rule out the fact that the Chiefs could completely shut them down? No.
Definitely stackable, though, that Raiders offense in this matchup. If they do find a way to keep pace, could actually put a little more on the board than Vegas expects. Brand, let's get to your survivor pick. Who do you like for this week?
Well, I like the psychology of good teams coming off tough losses, and I like the San Francisco 49ers for that reason. At home against the Dolphins, you get Garoppolo, Mostert, Deebo Samuel back. They're getting healthier. I mean, they're not going to get Nick Bosa back, which is too bad, but Kittle's back. They're getting all their A-listers back in that offense. The defense is still tough. I think this is the week I'd be throwing down on San Francisco.
Yeah, 7.5-point home favorites against the Miami team that I still just don't think is very good. I don't look at them as a threat to go in there and actually win that game. So I think that's a really nice call as well. We've got one more big question to get to before we sign off today. This one comes from BB Gore, half-point PPR league. Start 2 out of Jerick McKinnon, Kenyon Drake, and Juju Smith-Schuster. We'll go to you first, Brandon.
Man, lots of McKinnon questions this week. I love him. And I know that Mostert's back, but this is a team that can run 2 running backs in their backfield very successfully, and they may not have to throw the ball a whole lot. And Jimmy G's back, and they may not want to throw the ball a whole lot since he's been out for a little while. And I think they can sit on this running game and make dump-off passes to McKinnon. He can make some big plays. So for me, oddly, I'm going to go McKinnon and Juju, and I'm going to sit Kenyon Drake in this setup. I don't know where you're at on that one, Biller.
Yeah, we're agreed on Juju. I'm going to go with Drake over McKinnon. We'll give you both arguments on the McKinnon side, BB, and you can make your decision from there. This is a timetable that the 49ers laid out for Raheem Mostert a couple of weeks ago when he first suffered the knee injury. They told us it's not too serious. He's going to be missing a couple of games, but we expect him back somewhere in 2 to 3 weeks. He has progressed exactly along that timetable and is hitting that timetable for return here this week. Is McKinnon going away completely? Of course not. He's still going to be in there, but they have basically checked every single box that they thought they were going to have to for Raheem Mostert before he could get back, and they've done it right on time. To me, that says that Raheem Mostert is able to step back in and be the lead back for San Francisco. So I am a little bit more concerned about the touches that are available for McKinnon than Brandon is. That leads me to Drake. At least we gave you some unanimity on Juju.
Juju hasn't been getting extreme target volume, but I don't think the Steelers have been in a lot of situations where they've had to throw it a ton. Maybe this game doesn't necessarily follow that script either with them going up against the Eagles, but at least 26 points in each of their first 3 games. And Juju had his best game against the Giants, 24.9 DraftKings points way back in week 1. I just wonder if he's one of those guys who's being a little bit overlooked right now as the clear-cut number 1 in an offense that should continue to get back to its pre-2019 form. Do you guys look at him as a guy whose value is about to kind of take off here in week 5?
Takeoff might be a little bit of a stretch, if only because I don't know if, like you said, Pittsburgh is going to need him to do that, and it just might not be that brand of team, right? I mean, it's a team that's still going to lean very heavily on James Conner whenever he's healthy. It's a team that can really live with its defense, so I don't know if all the contextual factors are going to be there every single week for Juju to really be a top 10 receiver, but I think he is easily, obviously has that top 10 ceiling every single game and is never a guy you should be worried about. I don't know if the heights of the Antonio Brown era are going to be there for Juju, but someone who, if someone's trying to give him away for 90 cents on the dollar, even in my league, I would happily be going after Juju and letting him be looked at as someone who is not worth the price that we paid for him on draft day.
That's interesting because I see kind of a low-end wide receiver 1 still. What do you see, Brandon?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the development of Deontay Johnson will only help him in the long run. Just watching Pittsburgh, I feel like Juju's close to big plays even when he's not making them. And I think, he has kept the touchdown volume there even when the actual pass volume hasn't been there. That's a good thing. I think the pass volume is always capable of ratcheting up, and we know that there's times when Pittsburgh's just willing to let Ben Roethlisberger chuck the ball all over the field. You love Juju to be around for those moments. So back end wide receiver 1, if I'm redrafting today, I'm guessing I have him no worse than like wide receiver 15. So like, I'm not really that far out of range with where you're thinking DVR.
Yeah, that big playability is still there, and I think that's the one thing that puts him over the top, even if he doesn't get typical wide receiver 1 target volumes week in and week out. Gentlemen, great stuff as always. Enjoy week 5. Look forward to doing this with you again next Sunday.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's get some wins, guys.
Good luck setting those lineups this week. It's a little messy out there.
It is scramble time. That is going to wrap things up for this episode of the Athletic Fantasy Cheat Sheet presented by Jock Market. You can take control of your fantasy sports experience and download Jock Market now in the App Store. The Android app is coming soon. Be sure to get all of our written fantasy football content as well, including Jake's rankings for just $1 a month at theathletic.com/cheat sheet. For Jake Seeley, Brandon Funston, Michael Beller, Ed Melian, Jeff Zrebiec, and our man behind the scenes, Nando DeFino, I'm Derek Van Riper. Thanks for watching. Good luck in week 5.